Welcome to the Waterford Cellar in the Barrel Room. 2025 harvest is underway and looking really good, and excited to see one day what we're going to sip out the bottle. Mark le Roux, part of the winemaking team at Waterford, and I spend most of my time walking through vineyards, walking through the cellar, collaborating with people to try and make the best decisions to create the best wine.
What is it about older vintage Cabernet Sauvignon that excites you most?
You know, I sometimes think the discovery is what's really the exciting part, and maybe a little bit of the unknown. And I think with Cabernet, the only really thing I know about it is reliability. I always know I'm going to get something that I enjoy, but I maybe always can't put my finger on it. What I love about Cabernet is it follows quite a long journey. It starts pretty traditional. It's never overly flashy or overly fruity or overly showing, but it always seems to deliver a character that I feel is welcoming and homey, and sort of it smells like your family brand, but you can't really pinpoint a specific flavor. I think Cabernet is about journey and reliability and tradition, which I quite enjoy. I love a bit of tradition. Got the beard for harvests.
I love tradition as well. But you talk about the family brand and growing with Cabernet. Something like that doesn't happen overnight. So how has your appreciation for aged Cabernet Sauvignon evolved over the years?
I think I've always somehow enjoyed Cabernet. I just don't think I gave it a lot of attention in my younger years. It was something that I felt you probably understood quite early on, because it's known flavors that you're tasting. It's the black currant, you're tasting oak, you're tasting sort of the maybe caramel vanilla from the oak, which I think is very easy to recognize. So it feels like you pass it on quite quickly and you try and find other things that are more exciting. But I find the more I look at Cabernet, and obviously over the years and making Cabernet, and for the interest of the journey of it, it's something that's just been more and more intriguing, and picking up those finer nuances that have, I suppose, been a discovery of a new species type of thing. Is you just keep looking for that little bit extra that Cabernet is hiding away from you.
So not to make you feel old or like you've been making wine for so long, because I know it's been a couple of years, maybe one or two. Do you remember a specific vintage that made a lasting impression on you?
Yeah, there's so many, and I think if I look back when I started in the Waterford Cellar, which was the 2010 was my first vintage, so many of them have got great stories out of them, so they're memorable for different things. I feel 2010 will always be special, being the first one, but not really understanding maybe the cellar at that point. It was really just going through the motions and just learning from the experience that was already in the cellar. So from that point, it was just starting a new journey that was exciting. I think the first vintage really on my own in 2013 was something quite exciting, daunting, having the responsibility of needing to make the decisions that are going to set the wine for its future. So there's always a bit of a memory on that first vintage. And I think the vintage that made me feel a little bit more relaxed. A lot of hard work. So one of the bigger vintages that we've had at Waterford was 2014. And very impressed with that wine that came through. Tough vintage. I really enjoy the wines even today when they're 11 years old, something very exciting. But the most memorable, I think, today must be 2015 for many reasons.
Lovely. 2015 is a fantastic wine. And tell us what's in your glass.
So this is actually 2015 that you've popped in my glass. A wine I, funny enough, don't get to taste that often, probably a few times a year. It's always nice to go back to it. I think it's been the one wine I've learned the most about, from an ageability, from understanding Cabernets, from understanding the journey of Cabernet over time. It's broken a couple of my theories that I've learned in the past of what makes a wine age. I think it's changed my viewpoints. And every time I taste it, it just cements the fact that nature is impressive and don't try and overdo anything.
Keep it simple.
In a way, keep it simple.
I love that. Okay, how do you think Waterford Estate and Helderberg Cabernet Sauvignon ages and compared to other regions?
Other regions in South Africa?
Other regions in South
I think the Helderberg is an incredible site. I think our biggest advantage is being on a site closest to the ocean. Keeps the coolness, keeps the freshness, keeps the tension and the integrity in our tannins and in our flavour. And I think that is a huge contributor to the tension in our wines. I think it slows down our aging. I find our wines age quite slow. They don't evolve quickly over time. They're wines that need a lot of patience. They're not overly fruity. They're very mineral. And then on top of that, we face north, so we get the warmth at quite an early stage. So there's no need for hanging your grapes on the vines forever and ever. Amen. That can sometimes drain you out. You know, if you think of a marathon, much easier to run a half marathon. You feel much fresher afterwards, and I think that's a little bit like us on the north-facing slopes. And then something you can't ignore is obviously the soil and the structure, and how you're looking after your vineyard is a huge contributor. We have soils that I think create a very classical tannin structure. They're not overly wet, they drain well, they have great minerals and sort of stone structures to work from.
Brilliant. And what characteristic of aged Cabernet, Helderberg aged Cabernet Sauvignon, do you find most captivating? If you smell that glass right now, what is that characteristic that pins a Helderberg aged Cab?
I think for me on Cabernet, fruit is never the most exciting part of Cabernet. It's the sort of the earthy slate, cold stone character, which I really enjoy. Some people call it sort of pencil shavings. I think that character for me is very rich and very warming and very classical, very reliable. There is fruit, there's always a little bit of, I think it's a mixture, it's not just black currant fruit that you find on the Helderberg, it's generally almost like a red fruit that becomes spicy and rich in a sense. But I think mine is really the elegance, but the tension behind the wines. There's a lot of freshness in the wines. The wines aren't overly powerful that you almost need to scrape it off your tongue. There's elegance, but you can feel there's power in the back of the wine.
So when would you classify a Cabernet Sauvignon as an older vintage Cabernet? At what age would you say, okay, now we're starting to get to the good stuff?
So it would vary where you are, I think, in knowing the brands and your site where you're on. But for me, Waterford, definitely the journey starts at 10 years. I think everything prior to 10 years is, it's basically the paint color on your vehicle. It's just the flashy color. It's not the one that's going to last forever. So before then, a lot of your wine is relatively closed. A lot of your potential is still hugged up. From 10 years, you really start getting the richness of your tannins softening off. You get the character of more sort of a earthy mushroom forest floor character, which just brings in more of that umami flavor, more inviting, more cozy. It starts at 10, I think, and from 10 till 20, I think is a very, very exciting time for Helderberg Cabernet.
Very nice. And how have you felt your particular winemaking style has aided in our Cabernet going the distance, but also showcasing those characteristics that you talk about?
Yeah, so I think, without giving too much away, I think being more patient, allowing the wine to basically extract what it wants to extract without looking for something specific, without copying a previous vintage which you've thought's been great. I think really just interpreting the vintage and extracting in a way as much as what you can without overdoing it. It's really trying to understand if it's got 10 to give, let it give 10 and be happy with that. So it's about finding the natural balance and what's available. I think when you start searching for more or you try and adding, it's on a short-term basis maybe more enjoyable, but it's on the long run it falls apart.
If Mark le Roux were going to sit down with an older bottle of Waterford Estate Cabernet Sauvignon, what would you pair it with? What would your moment be? Paint us a picture of how you'd sit down to enjoy this bottle of wine.
I'm only allowed one wine.
You can do multiple wines.
I feel, if you want to sit down and it sounds like a long evening, and it's a pairing I've had recently, which I thought was something for me. It was quite eye-opening, and it's a younger cab, let's call it under 5 years old. Very primary in fruit, very bright, almost like raspberry fruit. It's got that real typical Sauvignon Blanc parent freshness and vibrancy. And the pairing was really sort of a carpaccio salad with deep fried anchovies, the little bit of the saltiness. And I think it's such a lovely way to start an evening with varietal that you can really follow a long journey with and still start something fresh and light. But otherwise, for me, I think Cabernet, because I suppose on the wine side, keep things relatively simple. I think a salt element goes a long way. I think Cabernet is also a very clean flavor. It's very earthy, so it's people that probably enjoy the outside, the cleanliness, the fresh air. So I think your plate of food can be relatively clean as well. You're looking at sort of more, I'm always going to go with, I suppose, steak. And I suppose the salt element's always going to be important.
So if you were to not pair the 2015 vintage cab with a food item, but you were to rather pair it with a moment, what would that moment be?
I think it would be sort of a moment that's come a long way, because I think 2015 is a vintage that's been, I think, very understated. I think lots has been spoken about the 2015 vintage, but ironically the wines have been extremely elegant, not very forgiving. So I think it's sort of a very sentimental moment, a moment that's lived with you maybe for a very, very long time. So maybe a reunion with really, really old friends from back at school or something, and you want to share something special, but not sort of overly fuss, maybe.
That's lovely. Can I join? Okay, for collectors, what advice would you give them about cellaring Waterford Estates Cabernet?
So I think the one advice is that we do offer 10 and 15-year-old vintages, so we've done it for you. Yeah, I think for Cabernet, you need a bit of patience, because I think it would be short-sighted to try and consume your wine before 10 years. So you'd need to be investing in the Waterford Cab to ensure that you've at least got a variety of age gaps, vintages, 10 years, 15 years. I think Waterford Cab ages really, really well. I've compared it to many Bordeaux's, a lot of winemaking friends that I've had from the Bordeaux region, which I've made over the years. We've had long conversations, and I think the Helderberg is very similar to an area quite north in Bordeaux, like Pauillac or Saint Estèphe, which is known for a very good aging potential red wines, and we have a lot of talks. But I think what most impresses me about those conversations is that Waterford's Cab is still elegant when it's younger as well. So ageability is there, but it's by no means lost if you consume it slightly early. You're just missing a character which is beautiful.
Stunning. If you could open any vintage of our Estate Cab Sav right now, which vintage would it be and why?
I think the very first vintage we ever made. and probably because of that. It's the oldest we can go of the cabs that have been made here. I know some of the vineyards are different today, but for me that's always sort of a little bit of a look in the future of what we can expect. So I think that first vintage will always be something special to open, knowing that it's Waterford's first. I think another vintage would probably be, I've spoken too much about the 2015 actually, but I mean 2015 is always a benchmark to go back to. But I think the one I'd really enjoy opening is the 98.
I do like that a lot as well. It's the first one. There's been a couple opportunities where we've tasted every single vintage that we've made. We did a big lineup like a couple of years ago. When you're tasting through all those vintages, what is the golden thread that runs through Waterford Estate Cab that collectors, people who cellar it, when they taste it, if they don't know what the wine is, something that lets them know that it's Waterford Cab?
For me, I think it's what you're left with on your palates. It's the texture and the mouthfeel that you get. The fulfillment and richness from a wine that's actually comes across as fresh and elegant. I think that's something that stands out with the Waterford wines, is that they always leave you with a lot of flavor and density, but they never finish bitter, they never dried out. I always feel that the tannins are granular and wholesome in a sense, if that makes sense. And there's great freshness, which I think we find from the Helderberg. So for me, it's the balance and the texture of the Waterford wines makes them different to many Cabernets that I taste.